Live from the sun-drenched cobblestones of the Eternal City, conversation crossing faith, culture, and current events. Civil discourse, civil debate, and the free exchange of ideas. This is Intersections with Bree Dail and Matt Dooley. Now your hosts, Bree and Matt.
And good morning from a very chilly, crisp autumn Rome. This is an all-new Intersections Crossing Faith, Culture, and Current Events with Bree Dail. Matt Dooley will be back next week. He is currently out on assignment. For those of you who are joining for the first time, I am an internationally accredited journalist, including accreditation to the Holy See as the Rome correspondent for the Epoch Times. You may also find me on Catholic World Report, and I have contributed to National Catholic Register, Newsmax, and other outlets. I hold a BA in History from Christendom College and a Master's in Foreign Policy and Diplomacy from the prestigious Norwich University. And usually our show is broken into three themes: news impacting faith, then connecting those to news impacting culture, and finally news impacting current events and politics. But in the last few weeks, we've had some special guests on. I'm happy to welcome back Cordelia Yoakum in our next segment. Our next segment and our last segment. But first, I want to really hit some of the news that have come out in the last week and a half in the Vatican. It's always exciting. First and foremost is it has been confirmed by the White House press that we are going to be expecting here in the Vatican at the end of the month. Our President Joe Biden, will be meeting with Pope Francis on the 29th of October. And they have said that they're going to be discussing things on foreign policy regarding treatment of the poor and humanitarian efforts, but no mention on the elephant in the room, which is, will Joe Biden be going to Mass? Will he receive Holy Communion? Which is an ongoing debate within the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops. And we did have Nancy Pelosi, and for many of you may have seen a tweet that I put out on my vacation. And it was based off of a report that had come down on the day that Nancy Pelosi, it was a Saturday evening Mass. Nancy Pelosi was here for the beginning of I believe it was COP26 that she was here for, which is the environmental meeting that's happening with the UN since last week. And the Pope was supposed to be going to this, but because of scheduling, or he may not have felt up to it, it was confirmed last week that the Pope was not going to be attending COP26 in Glasgow. Nevertheless, there was an opening here in Vatican, and Nancy Pelosi also came last week. She went to attend Mass at an American parish run by the Paulists, and the Mass was being live streamed. And I was contacted by a parishioner who said that there was some disturbance, possibly some heckling, exchanging of words. I wasn't able to independently confirm that because I was on my way to Venice, but after watching a video where the priest, the Paulist pastor, came out introducing her and saying that they were honored to have her there. During his homily, he mentions that to his parishioners, well, you may have seen or heard a commotion. And unfortunately, Nancy Pelosi, who was going to read their second reading, they had invited her to do so, had to leave abruptly due to security concerns, allegedly. So what followed it was pretty dynamic, because I received the tip that this possibly was due to some heckling, and this happened right after Mass, that the parishioner had sent this to me plus the video. What ended up happening 17 hours later, Nancy Pelosi's team came out and said actually it had to do with a, quote, anti-vax protest that was taking place about 1.5 miles away. What I find really interesting is that what they claimed there, it does not suppose that there wasn't also words being exchanged at the parish. But it seemed that the focus had to turn to a quote-unquote anti-vax protest. There was protest that was going on, a very large protest in Rome, but it wasn't exactly anti-vax. Another report coming out this week on this, and we can hit that a little bit, possibly at the end of this news coming out of the church, is that the Green Pass, which we heard, I reported on a few weeks ago, the Vatican had also adopted, which is a digital pass that confirms that you've either been tested for COVID within 48 hours, or and you've received that document, or you've been at least inoculated one time. And this Green Pass is now enacted. It was before where you couldn't go into inside restaurants and eat. You had to stay outside if you didn't have the Green Pass. You weren't able to go into museums and whatnot. The Vatican reported 2 weeks ago, the Vatican had adopted and had announced that they were going to now enforce that for going into any Vatican building or site. That includes, workplaces. It included St. Peter's, St. Maria Maggiore, reportedly all of these Vatican-owned, state-owned buildings. You were now going to have to display the Green Pass in order to get in. So the Italian government came out and said this past week, starting on I believe it may have been on the 16th, but don't quote me on that. It's been pretty dynamic this week, but within the last week, the Italian government came out and said anybody who is working must now provide the Green Pass, which obviously that has gotten pushback because the protests leading up to this enactment have been very strong throughout the country and are continuing despite reports like, say, a report that came out of the New York Times this past 2 days ago, claiming that since this law has come into effect, the protests have calmed down. It's not the case. In fact, there are ongoing protests taking place in Italian ports right now, sit-ins right now, because Italians, they rely on universal health care, and reportedly the vaccines have not been, for vulnerable people, it's been behind ensuring that people who want the vaccine can get the vaccine. Even that has been behind on the government side, and yet they've enacted these laws that have really restricted people, including now you can't work without the Green Pass. So people have walked off the job. There are lots of protests, and some of these protests have had some violence effect. And I actually met 2 days ago one of the protesters who was arrested allegedly for violence, but I had been provided both video, and the video was on RAI, which is the state-run television network, news network. As it was going on, they caught on video the arrest of this elderly gentleman who is probably around 6'2", very, very thin, elderly. And he ran to the aid of a friend who was also protesting peacefully. They were praying the rosary, and he ran to a friend because the friend, older woman, crumpled to the ground after a paper bomb reportedly exploded, and it popped her eardrums. And I met her too, she still has a hard time hearing because of this. But when he ran to her aid, the police tackled him, and then were pretty forceful and violent themselves, to the point where his arm was broken. And there are photographs of them, despite the fact that his arm was broken, putting him in handcuffs, and he has blood on his pants. This is not over. And so, yes, there was some violence at a protest about a mile and a half to 2 miles away from the parish that Nancy Pelosi was at. But it is interesting, I think, for people to realize that this was a live stream event. She was going to read the second reading, and she was going to potentially receive our Eucharistic Lord. again on video, again publicly, despite the fact that she is currently at odds with her own bishop on her public stance for abortion. So this is high stake politics right now that we're watching. And it will be very interesting to watch at the end of the month if Joe Biden also tries to make a public statement or public act receiving the Eucharist. So more on that later. There's a lot more stories that have come out this week. One actually that went viral yesterday that I had posted that's not exactly out of the Vatican, but it's still quite interesting. Dr. Fauci has come out and said on This Week ABC, this was yesterday, that if you're vaccinated and your family members are vaccinated, you can enjoy the holidays, including Christmas. It seems to have had a pretty big response on my tweet of people who've had enough with the restrictions, and especially commentary from Dr. Fauci. But this is what is being put out right now by the leader of the CDC and new COVID guidelines for celebrations within groups. Also, today is the Feast of St. Luke. And for those of you who have not been to Padua, where St. Anthony is, St. Luke is also there. I found out about that just simply by walking into a church that I thought was beautiful and large, St. Justina's in Padua. St. Luke is buried there as well as St. Matthias, the apostle, who replaced Judas. Both of them are there, and no one was there visiting. And I think it's probably because a lot of people don't know that St. Luke is in Padua. So next time you're in Italy, come to Rome, but also go and visit Padua. And finally, today, I want to make a note bene for those of you who are joining for the first time. When it comes to information, I believe it's really important to be very critical and critical thinking, and question reporting and ask for additional resources and sourcing, because right now a conference on transhuman code or transhumanism is taking place in the Vatican, and misinformation has been pushed by certain circles in the conservative right in the Catholic Church for the last week. I know that I started receiving pings on it about a month ago when it was announced, because the term trans is pretty hot term to be used nowadays in social media. I think that the concern is that this has to do with sexual identity and whatnot, but I really encourage people to not take the concerns or the fear that's being pushed or riled up and question, okay, what exactly is transhumanism and transhuman code? What exactly is that? If you take 2 seconds to Google, you'll see that it's actually a book written by IT specialists and experts on artificial intelligence and the moral ethics and limitations on AI and what it means for future innovation in technology. Should innovation be innovation of itself, or should we identify the ethics and moral values behind it? Is there a line? Is there a code that we have to ascribe to in order to not to not push the boundaries of moral ethics, and this debate is up for questioning on many sides right now. And the author put this out. You can go to their website. They are having a debate right now, and they have had similar debates with moral ethics experts from the Vatican. So be aware that there are people who seek to manipulate in order to stoke up emotional fear. And I think it's just, we need to be critical thinkers. So when we get back, though, we're going to be talking about identity. So stick with us. This is All New Intersections, Crossing Faith, Culture, and Current Events.
St. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 1:17, Christ didn't send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel. Many evangelicals see this passage as an indication that baptism is not necessary for salvation. But is this true? The answer is no, and here are some reasons why. First, I don't think Paul meant I don't have authorization to baptize. If that were true, well then he would have acted in disobedience when he baptized Crispus, Gaius, and the household of Stephanas, which he tells us about in the preceding verses. But we don't want to say that. It's more likely Paul was being hyperbolic in order to stress, one, the focus of his ministry, which was to preach, and two, it doesn't matter by whom you're baptized, which was the topic of discussion within context. Is Paul denying the necessity of baptism? I don't think so. I'm Carlo Broussard with the ready reason for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
We all know children have a natural innocence and a sense of wonder. Yet our world is full of distractions that can pull families in the wrong direction. But with the help of God and a church family, your children can grow in the security of faith, hope, and love. Weekly Mass provides that critical faith foundation needed in life. So if your family hasn't been to Mass in a while, we'd like to invite you home. Discover more at CatholicsComeHome.org.
And welcome back. This is an all-new Intersections Crossing Faith, Culture, and Current Events with Bree Dail. My co-host, Matt Dooley, will be back next week, and I am really excited to welcome back a guest co-host, Cordelia Yoakum, or Cor as we call her. She leads and inspires as an author, motivational speaker, and a brand and business growth analyst. She is an author. As I said, her book, From the Core, is amazing, and you can actually hear her read it on YouTube, but I highly recommend you go and buy her book on Amazon. Cor, I am really excited to bring you back on. Thank you for coming today and joining me.
Oh, my pleasure. I just have
I think
to tell you, I noticed my internet's a little bit unstable, so I didn't know if that was your internet or mine, but I might need to do a little company shift to go closer to my internet.
It may be me. I heard you kind of pause for a second, and I'm like, I'm not sure if this is me or you, but God willing, we will not have unstable internet in this time. But I'm glad that you're back, because we're going to be talking about brand strategy, but we're going to really start from some information, like just kind of a little bit of information about you before we kind of dive into some of the questions I have. So, Cor, in a nutshell, tell my listeners, tell the viewers out there who you are and why you're in Rome, and we can go from there.
Yeah. So my name is Cordelia. As Bree said, most people call me Cor. So as you're listening to me, you're welcome to think of me as Cor. I'm a brand and business growth strategist and have been for 15 years. I bring to companies a methodology that helps them grow into the new and the next. So the thing that I and Corehouse gets hired for most are for projects where people want to go where they've never been before. They want to design and build something and architect something and bring to market something that they've not yet done before. So that's what Corehouse does. In a nutshell, that's what Corehouse does. And why I'm in Rome can only be described as an act of God.
Yes, it's true.
I mean, I'll tell you, Rome was not on my roadmap, not at all. I came here for work, for a project that I was working on, and through an absolute unforeseen move, I ended up having to stay here from illness and am now here. And just in the way that God moves in the absolutely unexpected, I'm here for what looks to be the duration.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
no
so
one
excited.
more surprised than me.
I'm excited to call you my neighbor. And we have so many great conversations, but today I wanted to kind of shape this for our listeners returning to the core. And I have a question, because the last time we spoke, we started to kind of dive into identity, because that's a big key term today. Mm-hmm. What is identity? And I would like you to kind of go into what you believe identity is and your experience identity prior to your conversion and then post conversion, and how this has led you to developing practical tools based off of your book on conversion.
Right. So I'll say some of that broke up a little bit, Bree. So, but you and I have had this discussion over coffee, over breakfast, over lunch, over dinner. So I think I know where you're going with it. But if you need to redirect me, please do.
Sure.
You know, as a brand strategist, what you look to build is something that's authentic to the people who are running the brand. So a brand, you know, people have the elements of a brand within themselves, meaning they look a certain way, they sound a certain way, they talk a certain way, they behave a certain way, they move through space in a certain way. And all of that yields an impression. And that impression is what people receive from you. And it could be called your brand. Now there's a way of packaging that and all of that. And I don't want to go into that right now, but that's really the identity, is the impression that you leave on people. That's your brand. The thing that lingers, let's call it the thing that lingers. So what happens naturally in people has to be crafted in brands. So creatives go into war rooms. Usually we all wear dark glass, you know, the dark, thick rimmed glasses that you think of, and a lot of black wearing people. And you know what I mean? Like typical creatives. And we go in and we put vision, we sort of put a vision on a wall of what a brand might look like. And there's a whole process by which you get to the core of that brand. And the purpose of that process is so that, Bree, when you walk into Starbucks, or I walk into Starbucks, or our neighbor Alessandro from his, you know, sort of coffee shop, if he were to ever walk into Starbucks, then we would all have the same type of impression. And that's the purpose of brand strategies, to create consistency over time and over all of the mediums that a brand finds itself expressing itself. So my introduction to identity really came out of Hollywood. I did not know. I had a first job when I left college. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had a neighbor who decided, you know, she was going to be an actress, and she did it the right way. She went to Yale Drama School and she sort of did it the right way. I did not. I just basically on a Tuesday quit my job, and on Friday, you know, I was in Los Angeles deciding that I was going to be an actor, never having been on stage before. So I just knew that I wanted an adventurous life, and where I was and where I felt like I was headed was not that direction. So I surfaced in Hollywood and did all the things that someone looking to be successful in Hollywood does. I got an agent, I got headshots, I did the things, showed up at auditions and all of that. So my agent basically packaged me as you would package a brand. And because I have red curly hair, because I have freckles, because I have blue eyes, my agent decided I was the girl next door. So I actually had to borrow clothes to wear as the girl next door. I borrowed like a denim shirt and, you know, white tennis shoes and all that kind of thing, what I thought the girl next door might look like. So I showed up to audition after audition after audition and didn't get the audition, and didn't get any auditions. And to make a long story short, it actually took some wonderful casting people from Oscar Mayer Wiener who told me in no uncertain terms that I was not the girl next door and would never be cast as a girl next door. But in the event they needed a CEO for an all-male boardroom, and I would be sort of that CEO, that's what I would be hired for.
So what is the girl next door? That's the question that I've gotten from our producer, Adrian. What does that mean, the girl next door? And
so I think, you know, it's an essence. Someone like Cameron Diaz often gets cast as the girl next door, or Meg Ryan. So it's something that occurs at the essence. It's much less about how the person looks, although that's the gateway, right? So in the girl next door in the United States, Hollywood, you know, maybe 20, 30 years ago when I was doing this, it was really the blonde hair, blue eyed, you know, cheerleader kind of person. That's what that looked like, at least to my agent. And I like apparently looked like the girl next door. Yeah. Yeah. So there is this impression of the girl next door, but then there's also the essence that walks into the room. And I think that was the moment that I understood brand identity from a personal, visceral level, which is when you walk in the room, there is something that walks in the room with you and is available for everyone, even before you speak. It's, you know, people call it an aura or a vibe or whatever it is that you want to call it. The truth is, you walk in and your core essence precedes you. And so that was this introduction to this idea of brand identity, and it really blew the doors off my mind. And from that moment forward, I realized that in the world of crafting brand identity, you had to start with this core essence. So every single client that I have worked with from that moment forward, I use this tool or methodology of defining and establishing the core essence, whether it's, you know, a Fortune 5 company or a startup, whether it's in fashion or fintech or entertainment, it doesn't matter. The methodology and the process is still the same. And it always starts with the who. So,
you know, that's funny. I want to break in real quick, because I think for people to like kind of think about it, if you go shopping online for clothes, right, and you identify like some of these door, you know, online to door type clothes companies that you can sign up for. You can identify your style based off of certain clothes that are presented and together. And you're like, would you wear this? Out of all of them, which one would you wear? You choose that. Then they look through algorithms. Which one would you wear? And they develop a profile based off of those choices. And you kind of came up with that, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, I did. There was a process that I worked on with Zappos, and who consequently helped Amazon also categorize clothing like this. It was called Archetypes. I called it the Fashion Conversation. It since then has been called Archetypes of Style. And it's something, again, that I had just, you know, I watched the Zappos All Hands meeting. I was fascinated by All Hands meetings. I did not work for Zappos at all. And Tony Hsieh, who was the then CEO of Zappos, he announced that they were going to be getting into clothing. And I thought, you know, I love the online shopping experience with Zappos shoes. And I was super clear I would never shop for clothing from Zappos online. And I just found myself asking why, or rather, why not? And that's what led me to this discovery that while you may buy shoes like you buy auto parts, right? You buy a shoe to match an outfit or to fit a need. So if you need to go running, you're going to take up running, you need a running shoe. But clothing does not happen in that fashion. Clothing is exploration of identity. It's a self-discovery process, and consequently needs to be engaged in at a very different level. So henceforth, Archetypes of Style came up.
And you know, what's interesting too is that, you know, we're talking about industry and businesses, which it's very important for us to talk about, because those who are listening in the car on their way to work right now are thinking about this in one way or the other. How does this apply to their business and whatnot? But I think based off of conversations that we've had, and which we'll be talking about today, that like the what and the how, those elements are really important questions, but they're not the sole question. The sole question is identity. And there is something really magical about the process that you went through in, you know, pre-conversion to post-conversion recognition, identity. What was that? Can you kind of break it down for people? Prior to your conversion to evangelical Christian, you had an idea of identity. What was that, and how has that changed?
Yeah. So I think I had my latent subconscious idea of identity, and I'll share that with you in 1 minute. And then I had my actionable, practical, you know, critical thought, as you mentioned earlier, my critical thought around the subject of identity, which really was informed by this Oscar Mayer Wiener debacle, you know, and then leading into the process of brand strategy. So that was the thing that I actioned and worked with. But then there was this whole other thing on a subconscious level about what I believed about myself. And there's been some research done around what people feel about themselves and how they package their own identity. But for many of us, for really so many of us, there is often a schism in identity. There's a gap between, and this was before I had the concept of God, but there was this gap between who God says we are, and then informed by generally trauma or life experience, we land on who we say we are. So for me, subconsciously, I had a working, visceral idea of my identity based on who I said that I was. And for me, I said, I wasn't lovable, I wasn't likable. Some people have broken identities that say that they're not worthy, or they're not deserving, or they are deserving. If circumstances are harsh, they feel they are deserving of that. They're not a good person. Like there's so many schisms in identity that happen.
I think we can even go to the fact. I think we can even go to the fact that, what we're seeing right now in society with identity crisis may also be part of this whole element of I have to define myself because I don't have a definition. Either I don't have a definition, or my wounds and my trauma define me, or someone, what other people say on social media, that defines me. What my mom said about me defines me. All of these outward elements that shape who we are give us this declaration of this is who I am. And oftentimes it also has to do with my work defines me. Like there are elements of your work that you should be proud about, but it tends to be, especially in the US, the thing that I might perform is the thing that defines me. So did you have that sense?
My achievement, my status, my marriage. Yeah, sure. But I think you brought up the most fundamental, critical thing that happens in the pursuit of identity, or definition of self-identity, is this idea that it comes extrinsically. So when I look at my conversion process, that is the number one thing that shifted in me, was this shift from the outside world and how they respond to me maps to and informs what I believe about myself. Ergo, that's my identity, both one foot internally, this broken belief, and then outside responses and reverberations that I receive, either from, like you said, accolades or achievements or performance, and or negative responses like rejection or retaliation, or some of these things that just happen honestly in everyone's life. We all get rejected. Yes. We all have circumstances like that, right? But when you're trying to find out who you are and you're telling yourself who you are, you often anchor with one foot in both camps. My broken belief about myself, plus how society and culture is responding to me, or telling me who I am or what I should believe about myself based on whatever is culturally acceptable at that moment. Right. So, we're in Rome, we see a lot of beautiful artwork with very voluptuous women. And, that was the norm of beauty. That was the mark of beauty at that day, was curves, and more curves, and then we went through like a super skinny twiggy phase. And now we're back to like big booties and all sorts of stuff. Right. And so it's this moving, and I think that's really important. It's a moving target. And that is the one thing that God really shifted in me, is he gave me a fixed point. He gave me a fixed point that was not at all outside, that there was no longer an extrinsic marker that I was looking to, but rather absolutely everything was rooted in me as his creation, and how he poured down my identity and informed my identity from within. So when I think about, when you talk about sort of pre-conversion and post-conversion, I would say that those are the markers of differentiation. Is, I don't look, there is nothing. I could have a job today and not have a job tomorrow. And while that may be a jarring process, it in no way informs who I am, who I know myself to be, and what I believe about myself. Not at all.
That isn't, and so that is, I think, essential. It's essential. It's essential. It's essential to the ongoing conversation. Something that John Paul II emphasized throughout his pontificate was the dignity of the human person, and how each one of us have a dignity in our relationship, in our daughterhood and sonhood, in God, in Christ. And that you have said this to me multiple times. When you came to know him, he unlocked and kind of blossomed who you were. So when you came to know Christ, it was through
Yeah.
that interaction and knowing of him that you came to understand fully your dignity as core, that had nothing to do with anybody else other than how he informed it. And so, like you said, it's a fixed point, and something that I think is, people are listening right now and saying, oh my goodness. I know that people are listening right now or watching and saying, oh my goodness. This kind of is the puzzle piece that's missing in our post-Christian era right now, and why people are so desperate to be defined by something, because intrinsically
Yes.
they know that they are more than any of these things that people are saying that they are, or society hasn't put on them, but they don't know. Many people just don't know Christ, right? And so this has led you to write this book and write a compendium, which you're right now finishing, on practical tools based off of your walk. So you're not claiming, Core, that you're the expert on this, even though you understand brand identity, and God's really using the gifts that He's given you on this and your journey. But what you're doing is that you're providing like a workbook to your book in order for people to be like, huh, okay, like I see similar circumstances in my life. How do I go about this? We have 7 minutes left. So can you maybe go into that a little bit? And then, and for those of you who are listening for the first time, this is Intersections Crossing Faith, Culture, and Current Events. And I'm talking with Cordelia Yoakum, sorry, Core. And,
So I know.
I always go like, blah. And, for those of you who are listening, I really encourage you to read her book. From the Core, I've learned a lot about this whole idea of identity in Christ through listening to her journey. And, we always love these stories of conversion, but this is an ongoing story for her. So in the last 6 minutes before we go to break, and we talk a little bit about the stifling of glory that we are seeing in industry, and especially in Christian-led industry. You're creating this workbook, Practical Tools. Tell our listeners here what that's about.
Yeah. So as I wrote the book, I got feedback from people who read it saying, hey, if you went on this spiritual journey, I want to go on the spiritual journey too. What people have been saying to me is like, as I look at the intersection of spirituality and self-awareness, your life story, your story is a touchstone for me. So as I wrote this workbook, I really came to it with fear and trembling, because I thought, just like what you said, I am in no way an expert. I don't propose to be an expert. There is nobody who's an expert in transforming a heart and giving someone identity than God. I'm super clear about that. So what this workbook is, and I'll show you, I have it right here. It's this big, fat, giant 500 pager. And it's literally goes through the story. I mean, it's just, because what I put in the workbook is questions that I was being asked, I believed, by God as I was walking through this 7-year journey of transformation. So it didn't happen overnight. I had one moment, like a Paul encounter on the road to Damascus, where God really, from one second to the next, healed this brokenness within me and gave me a really clear idea that I was whole and complete just as I was. And that's not, there is no way that I can tell you how to do that, or just that was God. And I'm clear about that. But from that point forward, He has pulled me forward towards spiritual maturity by developing me along the way. And at every single stop, He's asked me to answer specific questions, or I've come to Him with specific questions. And so I just walk the reader step by step through some of these questions in the hopes that as you ask them to yourself and of our God, that you'll get some of the answers and insights that I was given as well. I honestly, again, like I said, I come to this with fear and trembling. I don't know if this will work. But I have to believe that if people felt resonance with my journey and feel like it's calling them forward to the same adventure of identity intelligence that God so divinely, desires for our life, is that we know ourselves more by knowing Him more, that we, live in this feedback loop of, I am who he says I am. Like, I am who he says I am. And so this workbook is the process of really like deeply unpacking, who does he say that we are? And
Right.
like in a really deep, intimate, raw, gritty, earthy, like really, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And I was going to say, folks
Were you gonna say
who are
something?
listening out there, it's something that's really important to understand, that there are a lot of self-help coaches out there and whatnot. And many of them are very helpful to people. But I have to say, I don't find authenticity often. And having met Core, I in no way doubt that herself, the way that God has informed her is authentic of her identity in Christ, because really her move here, the experiences that she's had in the last few months would have shaken so many people to the foundations, and they were really difficult experiences that I witnessed. And I saw her struggle. So in no way it means that the cross is taken away once you've had these, this kind of conversion. But I never once saw Core question who she was in God or who God was in it. And I thought that was really a keystone for me to realize the authenticity of what she is saying here, that even in some really difficult circumstances, she never placed that on God, but actually she pressed deeper into God during those times. And I witnessed that firsthand. And I think, for those of you who are listening, we're about to go to a break, but I think it's really important. Cor and I have been discussing the life of St. Paul and the life of the saints here in Rome. You can't help it. You're surrounded by it. And something that I find, in our discussions on the evangelical church is that in The Chosen, which Cor was a part of, and I, have been involved with as well, in The Chosen right now, that series is actually bringing to life the different people who surrounded Christ in a very visceral, human, incarnational way, something that we as Catholics are used to going to church and seeing the art and hearing the stories of the saints. And what I'm seeing in Cor's witness statement is a current saint in the making. And what I mean by that is that we all are called to this higher level, this higher movement towards Christ. Even if it might be circular at times, we're heading towards a place. When we get back, we'll be talking more with Cordelia Joachim on her journey returning to the core. Stay tuned.
A popular objection to Jesus' resurrection is that it's merely a ripoff of pagan myths about resurrected deities. Should this be a cause of alarm? I don't think so, for a couple of reasons. First, Christians couldn't have copied from pagan myths because the idea of resurrection as a new embodied life after death was foreign to the pagan worldview. Recall how the Athenians scoffed at Paul's preaching on the resurrection in Acts 17. Second, the majority of the alleged parallels are bogus. The deities never really rise from the dead. The spirit of the Greek god Attis entered into a pine tree after his death, and the Egyptian god Osiris merely reigned as king of the underworld. So to my Christian friends, no need to fret. Our belief in Jesus' resurrection didn't come from pagan myths. I'm Carlo Broussard with a ready reason for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
Years ago, when I started acting, modeling, and singing in Mexico, my Catholic faith was not the center of my life. It took me many years to discover that success, fame, money, and all the pleasures of the world were not going to fulfill me. I got to a point in my life where I thought I had everything, but I realized something was missing. Thankfully, I began a faith journey that brought me back to God and home to the Catholic Church. You can too.
Discover more at CatholicsComeHome.com.
And welcome back to an all-new Intersections Crossing Faith, Culture, and Current Events with Bree Dail. And I have the pleasure of having this last few minutes with my guest co-host today, Cordelia Yoakum. Thank you, Cordelia, for giving me this opportunity to speak with you. I am really just excited for people who are listening to this to really hear your take on the cultural aspect of, uniting our faith in a practical way in a journey, both, having to deal with industry as well as personal journey. And in our last segment, we were talking about identity and how identity is so critical to our everything that we do, including our faith and our united factor towards Christ. If we don't know who we are in Christ, how can we really represent all the gifts that he's given us and be really used as tools in his glory? And we've had these conversations. It's something that I personally am really interested in, is that Catholic media, Christian media, Christian news, really that identity as this is being Christian, this is being family focused, this is being Christocentric. Oh gosh, it's not meeting the bar in most cases nowadays. If you go to the Hallmark Channel, if you go and watch, Christian movies and Christian, productions, it always seems like underfunded and a little cheesy. And, something that I said to you was, what I've said is that it tends to stifle the glory of God by making this cookie cutter like convert. So when we hear about these conversion stories, it's oftentimes like, cookie cutter. And once you converted, then you don't have any real, like, the convert really never looks back and it's always forward, which is practically not the case. It is an ongoing fight up a very high mountain towards Calvary. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this based off of your experience in that industry and what you're going to be bringing through Core House, which you have just relaunched in your here in Rome as a consultant in brand identity. What is going to be different about this approach, knowing that you have had this experience of identity in a very visceral way, and how are you going to provide that gift, something that you didn't seek, but something that was given to you, to others to be able to practically apply in their lives? It's a pretty big question.
Yeah, it is a big question, but it has a very clear answer for me. So the first step that I'm taking is understanding that spiritual transformation is a process and one that needs to be supported, and I believe isn't. So George Barna, who is an amazing researcher in America about the Christian worldview and Christian faith, he wrote a book called Maximum Faith. And in it, he said that the church is offering a menu. So if someone comes in, they have a conversion moment, either they have a conversion moment that leads them to the church, or they have a conversion moment in the church. The church then offers, oh, you want to learn more about Christ? Great. You like Sunday worship, you can also come on Saturday night. And you like Saturday night, why don't you also come Wednesday midweek? You like Wednesday midweek, why don't you serve in the nursery or in the parking lot? And there is like the Bible study small group element too, but it's really just like, it's like a menu of choices of how to participate. What I noticed in my own conversion journey, and what I've noticed in those who've walked a similar path, is that journey of going from the previous identity to an identity in Christ, I've often called Christ savage, and it really shocks people. But the truth of the matter is, in these last 7 years, I have been taken to the edge of my sanity. I have been, when you are stripped of your identity as you knew it, especially for me, someone who is in my 40s, you lose friends, you lose everything that you anchored in, and you're being asked to anchor somewhere else. But, you're being asked to anchor in a brand new relationship that you don't really know, that you can't sit down and tactically have a conversation with this person. Like, he comes to you through the Holy Spirit, which can feel so esoteric. Right. So, it has been the most raw journey of my entire life, of my absolute entire life. And I think, to your point, which brings me to point two. So the first point is, I intend to help provide the roadmap of what happens in spiritual transformation. So George Barna in this book canvassed, I believe, 5,000 to 7,000 people and identified a 10-stop journey along the spiritual transformation process. So rather than reinvent the wheel, I will map his research with my own personal journey to give people tools to support the savagery and adventure of the process, the grit and the glory the whole way, because both of it is quite discombobulating. So that's number one. And number two, I think you had mentioned The Chosen, and if I've learned anything from, well, I've learned so much. It was really, truly an experience of a lifetime. But what I loved is, even just yesterday, you and I watched the trailer for Dallas Jenkins, who's the creator of The Chosen. We watched the trailer for his very first, his film before the
film before The Chosen,
which was the resurrection of Gavin Stone.
Right.
We're like, wow. Just wow. It is everything you think of when you think of Christian media. It is the gloss that misses the grit entirely. It is packaged for family consumption, but when you're talking, like, it is not clean, it is not hallmarky, and so we just sat down in front of that trailer with the intention of watching the show, and just said lovingly and respectfully to the Dallas that we both know and adore, yeah, we're not doing it.
No, we can't do it. It's like, for me, it's like Catholic media is very similar in that way. Yeah, Catholic media is very similar in that way, is that, like, some of it's cotton candy, and then some of it's like super focused on scandal and fear, and there's no actual, like, I mean, it turns off so many people that, like, you can't it's very hard to find the thing that, like, goes to the center of the identity of the Christian journey, which, in the Catholic Church, it's funny because what you speak as an evangelical is something that I said, what really is the mission of the evangelical world? And what I found really beautiful, Cor, in what you said was that the evangelical world really does focus on evangelizing, which is getting as many people in the door as possible to experience Christ, right? But then I said, well, what keeps them there? And you're like, ... Like, there's just, it's really hard. Whereas, like, it seems to me that within the Catholic Church, and there are plenty of missionaries out there. I know some missionaries who work so tirelessly for the good. But it seems like in the Catholic Church, there has been, especially within certain community that I'm involved with, which is traditionalists, seem to tend to kind of circle the wagon, so to speak, on the beauty that they have because of so many outward threats, whether it's true threats or not, envisioned threats, it's still there. And so it's like, people will find out if God wants them to find out, but we're going to kind of be within our groups. And so that sense of evangelization may not be as prevalent, but we have things that within the church, the dogma and tradition, as well as scripture and the liturgy, that keeps us there. But both of the churches don't have the sense of community. Like, why should you stay? Like, how can we help one another through this journey together? So I think your mission is so vital right now. But yeah, like you said, what we were watching with, go ahead.
Well, I want to come back to answer the question fully with the difference between the resurrection of Gavin Stone and The Chosen. So when we talk about, like, CoreHouse and what CoreHouse's focus will be, it will be to provide the support for the journey of transformation in Christ. And then secondarily to, Dallas went through not a conversion process, but he really went through a dark night of the soul, he had just had this epic failure with the resurrection of Gavin Stone, and really thought that was the end to his career, and ended up making a short film for this church, and then ended up making The Chosen. And The Chosen, here's the difference. The Chosen is full of grit and full of the vulnerable and the real and the accessible and the authentic. And I think, what I look for now in projects as I'm looking to produce content and looking to sort of help people bring to light their stories, because again, we're called to overcome by the blood of the word and the power of our testimony. And so there's nothing more powerful than a testimony, but that testimony, we have to be okay in Christian entertainment and Christian media. We have to be okay with the grit. If you do not show the grit, you do not get the payoff of the glory.
Right. And we see that in the Passion of the Christ. We see
for
that.
Me, it's really,
And we have a little bit of lag, so sorry for those of you who are listening, but we've seen that in the Passion of the Christ, and the Passion of the Christ was by no means an easy thing to watch. And I think something that, like, as we lend towards the end of the show, we only have 2 minutes left, Cor, but I do want you to kind of make a pitch for Core House. But before we do that, I want people to understand that whether you're evangelical, whether you're another denomination of Christian, whether you're Catholic, the lives of those who came before us are to give us and the grit and their testimony. It's there for us to continue to encourage one another towards our end, which is Christ. We're supposed to support and encourage one another. Paul says this. So encouraging, you will have the last statement. It's 1 minute. Core, do a pitch for Core House. What is Core House going to do?
Oh, I think I've done it, really just walking alongside kingdom players and kingdom, projects and unlocking that next step for them in the new and the next, and showing people the real process of spiritual transformation in Christ.
Thank you all for joining us on Intersections, Crossing Faith, Culture, and Current Events with Bree Dail. Matt Dooley will be next week with me again, where we'll be talking all things politics and faith. But for now, I wish you all the best and this coming week, and ask for your prayers. Again, see you next week on Monday. Thank you, Cor.